Well, thank you very much. Thanks for, again, like the other speakers, thank you for inviting me. First thing I want to do is just apologise slightly for what's on the screen as my attribution. I actually work for the UK, at the moment I work for the UK's Knowledge Transfer Network, which is part of Innovate UK, which is the government's innovation agency, I have to say insufficiently seen in Wales. And I can make outrageous statements because I'm actually moving out of there in the middle of next month. I also, the other attribution, which is the one that's actually on the programme, is that I give lectures for a very bizarre institution called Gresham College in London. I don't know if have any of you heard of it? Ooh, one or two. Well, it's where the Royal Society started, actually. Christopher Wren was a Gresham professor, and I was privileged enough to be offered a new environment professorship a couple of years ago. It's a strange college because it has no registered students. It just gives public lectures. It was founded in 1597 as the kind of social media of the time to give lectures to the public in English, which was, radical stuff, a bit like Facebook in the 16th century. Okay, so and I give a few lectures for them every year. I always think the registrar's job must be great. You can be registrar of Gresham College and not actually have to register anybody at all, but she tells me she's very busy. Okay, so what I want to do this afternoon is just not to keep you, stand too long between you and the football and the rampaging around that's going on outside, but to have a little ramble around the subject of innovation, particularly in the context of the water sector and the water industry, a distinction I'll come back to in a minute. And I don't want to sort of insult you by suggesting you don't know what innovation is, but this is quite an interesting issue, actually. I just put some general statements up there at the moment on what innovation is. Let's say it could be a new product or service, or it could be something not previously imagined. I'm going to come back to rather more practical accounts of how people look at innovation and what they think it is in a minute or two. But innovation in the water sector has been the subject of attention for quite a long time. And again, this is not, we don't have the time this afternoon to go through all the analyses that have been done on this. But back in 2009, there was a review, a national review done by, known as the Cave Review. I've forgotten the chap's name now, but there's probably, his name was Cave, Michael Cave, I think it was. And he looked at innovation in the water sector and said that there was a problem. So whilst saying that in Britain in particular, there'd been a lot of investment, this was since the privatisation of the water industry some years earlier, and generally in Britain we were meeting standards. There was we were generally doing okay, but he did point out that there was a backlog of problems and rising customer expectations. Now, did that mean everything was all well? Well, he said it wasn't all well, and that's quite a long time ago now. I raised the issue of who I worked for because on behalf of the Knowledge Transfer Network finishing last year, I went round interviewing about 80 or so people who were involved in the water sector, asking their opinion about innovation. I'll say who they were in a minute or two, but they did say that the overwhelming majority said, yes, there is a big problem with innovation in the water sector. When it says there the overwhelming majority opinion says yes, actually one person said no. And that person, he, said there wasn't a problem because basically we were doing all right. So there's no problem. Nobody's complaining much, therefore there's no problem. He also made some commentary about the fact that his industry was earning a lot of money and paying its shareholders and its directors very well, which again is probably not something I would articulate if there were anybody here from the major water companies. Perhaps there is, I don't know. Anyway, there is a problem with innovation in the water sector, and the only people who thought that the problem was not perhaps as serious as others were the people in the large water companies. And what was the problem? Well, again, I'll come back to a bit more detail in a minute, but we do know from surveys that have been done on behalf of the European Union that innovation in water technology in particular is very, very slow. I mean, Chedo's was talking earlier about blue-green and the innovation needed to get that accepted. Studies that were done of European projects suggested it takes typically 10 years to get something from the pen of the bid writer to some kind of action. And I followed that up. My own organisation was doing a project on this as well called WaterDiss 2.0. You have to have these sexy titles, we all know, to get the grants approved. But ours suggested actually it was 12 years in the projects that we looked at that had European funding. But more significantly than that, I think, the vast majority of work that the European Union had funded had not yielded anything applicable at all. Now that's a pretty shocking state of affairs, I think. Part of the reason probably was that the dissemination of the work, which was particularly that work undertaken by academics, it was disseminated through academic journals, and that is not where people actually look for their information if they're interested in the application of science. So very limited innovation appeared to be emerging from that research. Now, let me park that issue of innovation for a minute and just turn to nature-based solutions. I've taken a definition here about nature-based solutions from the EU, and again I was thinking about this 3 or 4 weeks ago, and this perhaps wasn't the right place to have taken it given recent developments. But the definition that we've got up here is the one that's informing the funding that's available at the moment for projects in this area, and there is a lot. I'll show you a list in a second. But it's the definition that they use is nature-based solutions. We define nature-based solutions to societal challenges as those inspired and supported by nature, and then there's some more text which says cost-effective, simultaneously providing environmental, social and economic benefits and building resilience. Okay, now there is a perception, I think, that in the water environment, I will just show that one. There's this big list of funds available at the moment from which you can apply for, now open, Horizon 2020 calls, lots of them on this theme. In fact, there are others popping up now in the circular economy calls, funding available for water-related projects, which are essentially nature-based projects as well. So, I want to just look, though, how we might think about this concept of nature-based applications. And I want to just reflect for 1 minute on this incident, which is not too far from here. This is the flooding in summer 2007 in the Severn Basin. I know a little bit about this. I was the technical advisor to Gloucestershire County Council when they were trying to sort out the mess afterwards. And this was the Chief Constable of Gloucestershire, speaking on behalf of the police service nationally, described this as the largest UK peacetime emergency we've seen. And it was a very serious emergency. Although the number of houses and businesses actually flooded was substantial, the big issue was that nearly 400,000 people lost their mains water supply for anything up to 3 weeks. Now, actually, if that happens to you, it takes you about a day and a half before you revert to virtually medieval circumstances if you live in the middle of a city. You immediately have no sanitation. In fact, the situation was made even worse because somebody from Severn-Trent went on the radio to issue a calming statement, and his calming statement said, "We have a bit of a problem, so please will everybody be very careful at how much water they use." Well, you can imagine what happens if you're told that, can't you? Everybody ran home and filled the bath. And the water that might have lasted for 2 or 3 days actually ran out within 6 hours. So some people who arrived home to their house, the only water they had was the 2 inches left in the bottom of the kettle after breakfast. And that's a pretty difficult situation to be in. And you can't flush the lavatory. Well, not after your 3-year-old's flushed it once, having been told not to, then you've lost the lot. So it was a very, very serious problem. It's often described, these kind of things are often described as wicked problems, you know, where there's social dimension, a technical or engineering dimension, and really difficult to sort out. And the solutions we look for in trying to address big flooding problems partly rest on nature-based solutions. So people say, well, we'll do some intervention in the catchment area, we'll manage land use, we'll do floodplain storage, we'll stop people living on floodplains, and we'll do a bit of engineering as well. Okay, so that's what we commonly think about as a nature-based solution to flooding problems. And it's undoubtedly true from the research that we've done, and there's less research actually on this than you'd think. But from the research that we've been done, there is evidence that managing catchments and using nature-based solutions can have some beneficial impact on major flood events. Not quite as straightforward as you'd think to demonstrate, actually. But anyway, we can come back to that if people want later. So the sort of things that have been done to address this, again in a nature-based solution, are the sort of things, or an introductory version really, the sort of things that Chado was talking about earlier this afternoon. I've put an example up here of a company that I worked with, a landscape architecture company that were doing designs that hold back water a number of years ago now. So they were working on this idea of developing sustainable drainage systems, trying to generate additional benefits in terms of biodiversity and public access as well. So the nature-based solutions, that language of nature-based solutions didn't exist then, but that's really what they were doing. This is a place called Dean's Hanger near Milton Keynes, and it's attractive, as you see, and the houses around there attracted a premium as well. So a nature-based solution. Now, I like this cartoon. What if it's a big hoax, climate change? What if it's a big hoax and we create a better world for nothing? It's not just the cartoon that I like, but the list that's on the screen there is many of the dimensions of resilience and stresses on systems like the flooding in Gloucestershire that we have to deal with through innovation. So we've had mention today of livable cities by the first speaker today, and clean water and air and healthy children and so on, energy independence. Those are all the kind of stresses, the kind of issues that we've got to look at. Okay, now, part of nature-based solutions is about being resilient to shocks. And the word resilience is very widely used today in this context, the context of managing water. I want to ask a couple of questions really here about what it means, because I don't actually think we know what it means properly. So put up here two alternatives in terms of resilience to shocks. If we were designing water systems to be resilient to shocks, such as occurred in the Gloucestershire flooding example, should we be designing local self-sufficiency of networks, water systems, communication systems and so on, or should we be designing very hardened and more interconnected regional and national networks? Now those are two quite different strategies for approaching the issue of resilience. And we know from the Gloucestershire event that the signal issue that was raised subsequently in the Pitt Review and incorporated into the legislation was to do with the interconnectedness of different systems. One system failed, the IT system, for example, or the transport system, and then the rest of the system collapses as well. So there are questions about the meaning of the term resilience. And here's another question, similar question. Do we mean complex and very technologically dependent infrastructure, or infrastructure that allows a failure and the failure causes it to revert to something, a safe position? Somebody raised this as a question, I think, earlier this afternoon. So I don't think at the moment we're really too certain what we mean by resilience to shocks, but let's assume we can work it out. I think there are a number of things that we know resilience might mean and that we have to bear in mind in terms of thinking about innovations, whether they're technological or sociological. So, for example, things like, do we know that the standards between different bits of what the Pitt Review called critical national infrastructure, do we have standards that can transfer across? Can we cope with the logistics of extreme events? The best example of that, a humorous example of logistics during extreme events, was actually not in the 2007 event, but at an earlier event in about 1998, I think, in the Severn, where the Fire and Rescue Service set out in flooded Gloucestershire to rescue people from caravan parks in soft-bottom dinghies. And caravan parks, I don't know if any of you know caravan parks, but every caravan is surrounded by concrete gnomes and rabbits. Have you seen those? Yeah? And they stick up, you know, concrete spikes, and the boat's just got the bottoms ripped out of them by, you know, thousands of concrete gnomes. So, you know, logistics. They also told me actually their Wellingtons were too short. That was another big problem. But anyway, logistics is a big issue. We need, if we want to go on to resilience, we do need smart forms of monitoring, because we need to be able to control what's going on. And we need to enhance this bounce back ability, you know, to be able to recover pretty quickly. We also need, probably, to think about different sectors working together. And again, we've had elements of this being talked about today. So we have to not only focus, if we're water specialists, as I am, but water and energy and transport and waste and food all have to work together as systems. Connectivity we've got there, climate change mitigation, again, is part of resilience. And then another part of resilience is probably, and very attractive to the government at the moment, is about generating wealth for the UK. That's an important element of resilience for any industry, I think. But the market for water technology, particularly, or water management internationally, is very large, about 5 billion allegedly. Okay, now I'll quickly go through these. The sort of challenges that the UK water industry is facing, you'll know some of these. It's about leaky pipes, it's about customers starting to say, you know, you're being rude to me and it's too expensive, and so nobody comes when I call, and all of those things. Water quality, Water Framework Directive, that might go, of course. That would be good, wouldn't it? Contaminants in drinking water is another thing. Carbon targets, and so on. I should say sustainable development goals, and so on. So lots of challenges for the water industry. Okay, now let's turn our attention for a minute to who the water industry or the water sector actually is. Because it's very easy sitting in this room, I think we've got probably quite a lot of academics, and people think, well, the water industry, it's them, it's the sector, it's us or them or somebody. It's actually a huge number of different organisations, from regional water companies like Welsh Water, who deal with water and sewage, usually. It's got regulators like Ofwat, the Drinking Water Inspectorate, the Environment Agency, DEFRA, government departments, local authorities, and so on. And then we've got what I've largely classified here as the unregulated sector. Of course, it's not unregulated, but it includes the contractors and small enterprises, entrepreneurs and research organisations, and so on, charities and voluntary sectors and other businesses and customers, floating off the bottom of the screen there. So the water, not necessarily the industry, but the sector, is very large and very diverse. And one of the points I think I want to make is that water is everywhere, as my title implied, but actually it's nobody's primary responsibility. All elements are nobody's primary responsibility. Some organisations are closer to the centre of what's going on than others, and of course the water companies and the regulators are near the heart of things. Whereas, I don't know how many academics we've got here, but academics are a little bit further away, actually. They might not think so, but actually they are. Customers are supposed to be near the centre. I put a nice pink arrow on there to suggest that. Actually, I think it's probably very far from the truth, that, actually. But trade associations, government departments probably fairly important, trade associations a bit further away, professional bodies and so on a bit further away again. But they all have a voice. If you try and do an analysis, the Natural Environment Research Council funded somebody to do an analysis of how many organisations there were. I won't put them up. It ran to about 20 screens worth, and there are lots. But you can think about them as being an overlapping set, overlapping sets, rather. I don't know whether you always get those 3-part Venn diagrams, don't you? This is a genuine 5 Venn diagram, which every element is actually correct. Every overlap is possible. Individuals who you might ask for opinion fall within one or other of these various sets. Some individuals, of course, fall in more than one of those groups, which makes it interesting when you try to get a view from people. So, on behalf of the Knowledge Transfer Network, I trundled around collecting the sector's views on innovation. And I went through all sorts of stuff, mainly interviewing people, quite a large number of people, from government ministers through to people running small and medium-sized enterprises, through to academics, through to 1 or 2 customers, trade unions and so on. And actually, the truth of the matter is you can't separate out views perfectly. You can only get a general sense of things. But people do tell you what innovation is. So, for example, people, again, I'm not going to read all of these, lots of things, but people have different views about what innovation actually amounts to. And I think one of the things that's important is to pick up something like this one here that says it's not just technology, but it's smart thinking, though core components will require technology. Most people think it's about incremental change with comfort zones and recognising the limits of existing systems, so we get improvements in billing systems and reduction in debtor days as significant innovation. But it's not, said one person to me. Okay, we could go on. Some people gave much more concrete ideas about what innovation might actually be, something that they would be looking for. So, for example, total city simulations that could run forward for 50 years about water supply and drainage in a city, for example. Forecasts about what infrastructure might amount to. Somebody thought it was about things like newt DNA in water, which is surprisingly important if you're a developer, actually, and you find great crested newts on your site, on your development site. New technologies, mathematical modelling was an innovation, but it's not now. Using water smarter more than once. Software too, and also cultural matters. Those are important as well. Now, what time are you? You was indicating 5.
You've got about 3 minutes left.
Okay. Right. So some of the problems that people raised were on here with problems with innovation. Again, you see attitudinal problems, lack of vision. It's all caused the pension companies are the problem, and so on. There's too much money making. People said it's difficult to talk to universities. People in water businesses said the clever people. That's good, isn't it? You're here, but your language is too complicated. Conversely, the water industries are not interested in basic research. Well, perhaps not. It goes on and on and on. Water's too cheap. Over Ofwat is a big problem. There's stopping innovation in water, and so on. If we go outside the main businesses, people who appear in that Venn diagram as not in the main water companies, people make very contrary, a number of people have very strong opinions about the role of university research, often very negative. So people will say things like, higher education is not properly managed to do applied research. Too much blue skies, not enough applicable science, and so on. It's very uncomfortable. what I've done here is just arranged ideas about innovation in water on a spectrum. And what it does is it goes here from innovations which we might think are quite minor, which relate to things like reduction, the way you communicate with your customers, your billing mechanisms, through a range of broadly technological innovations. As you come over to the right hand side here, you get more and more, you get bigger and bigger innovations until you get to the right hand side where you're looking at perhaps complete organisational change. Now, just to give this a little bit of exemplification, this is a project called Plymouth Poo Protection, which is just a startup now. It's somebody in Plymouth University, and he's discovered how to do in situ detection of fecal contamination in environmental waters, which is a really significant thing, and he's just started exploring that. So in terms of my diagram, I'd have this somewhere here. It's a sort of monitoring type innovation. Here's another one. This is a Portsmouth innovation. It's about passive water monitoring for river device. It's quite clever. It's very simple. Here's somewhere, I don't know whether any of you have ever used one of these, a Propelair low water use toilet. There's some in King's College in London. They're very satisfactory apparently, and they cut water use by 84%. There's a really horrific sucking noise like an airplane. You have to have put the lid down before you use it, I have to say. So it's already in use, again somewhere in the middle of the range. Here's a new one, very early stage this one, solar powered water purification for rural areas, again somewhere in the middle of my range. Here we're getting more to do with integrated systems. This little company in Edinburgh called Topolytics, who have started to merge together data sets for very rapid visualization and handling of environmental data. It's really clever stuff. Monitoring pipelines. Again, we're coming over to the right-hand side of that diagram. Syrinix is a company in the east of England, do real-time monitoring of leaks in pipes. Again, it's clever stuff. And the one to watch, I think, certainly is Albion Water. In my view, these people would be right over on the right-hand side of my spectrum. They are specialising in areas where there's a water shortage, where developers want to build houses, and Albion subcontract effectively to the big water companies to provide a whole service which includes water supply, wastewater treatment on site, SUDS type arrangements, water efficiency through the appliances in the houses, and biodiversity benefits. And they have just started now collaborating with Wessex Water and have sites where this is already going on. So they're starting to look at the whole system, not just the water, but the energy, the recovery of resources, the management of the land for biodiversity, and so on. Really worth looking at. Now, I could give you hundreds of new technologies. I can't go through all of them. There's lots and lots and lots. I draw your attention to something called the Hype Cycle. Have any of you come across this before, the Gartner Hype Cycle? This is the idea that any new technology, you start off and it gets really quickly visible, and then it reaches this sort of peak of inflated expectations, and then everybody goes, oh, it doesn't work, and so it collapses into the trough of disillusionment before finally climbing up and reaching some sort of use at the end. Now this is produced by American pundits called Gartner, and they actually put particular technologies onto these things, some of which you can see on here. So you can see smart data, for example, on here, and it tells you how long, where it is, and how long it thinks it's going to take to get somewhere. It's to inform investors. So the latest one, here's one here, and you can see it's got, for example, relevant to the water industry, it's got connected homes, which is where you control all your devices from your mobile phone while you're sitting listening to me, for example. Why you should want to, I'm not sure, but they seem to think it might be important. And they flag up forthcoming technologies. This is the latest summary. Now, in terms of innovation, in the water industry, we may not like it, But this is what is actually happening. So things like 3D printing, the information of everything, not just the Internet of Things, but information about everything. Internet of Things architecture platforms and so on. These are things, adaptive systems. These are things that are really important and coming. And other people are looking at the future as well. Some excellent reports. I brought some along here that you can look at if you're interested, but lots of things. But nature-based solutions, what do you notice? Nobody's mentioned it at all. Not one. Not one. Okay. Now, what I would draw out of this is my last slide, I think. We have to approach this differently. If we actually want to get nature-based solutions into public awareness and into innovation in a useful way, I think we have to think about what it is about nature-based solutions that's important. And I've summarised it in just 5 headings here. Organic and systems that are integrated with other systems like energy from wastewater, heat from wastewater, and so on. Circular economy initiatives, it's really important now. Low energy and resource efficient solutions, long-lasting solutions, and solutions that are resilient to shocks. Those are the things that we've actually got to pull out of this. It's not just about things like catchment management, but it's about other kinds of technologies that fit into here somewhere and display these kind of characteristics, in my view. Now, I'm very keen on nature-based solutions that have those the blue-green things that Shado was talking about, that I showed in my slide earlier from the landscape architecture from Ilman Young. I'm very keen on those, but I think we have to accept that there are other kinds of solutions which need to be brought to bear on these problems as well. And I am very optimistic about the future. Thank you.